Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Melissa Wilson with Lunch for the Soul. I'm from Fox 26 Morning News. I'm the morning anchor, but also a medical reporter. And as a medical reporter, I get to meet the most intriguing people with some of the most remarkable stories. And that is certainly the situation today. As we all just wrapped up Mother's Day recently, I can't think of a better person to bring in this week, someone who has been through so much, but has so much to celebrate as a new mom. So without further ado, here is Jennilee Mire. Hi, Jennilee. How are
Hi.
you?
Good, doing good.
Oh, welcome to Lunch for the Soul. I'm happy you're here to share your dramatic story. You're such a strong young lady, and I know you've been through a lot. So I want to make sure that we can just get everybody up to date with what was going on. So I'm going to first of all show everybody a few photos, and we'll give everybody just a sort of a sense of what you've been going through. We're going to go back to your pregnancy, and you were so beautiful. Oh my goodness, look at you. So, but what happened at 20 weeks pregnancy?
So for my 20-week ultrasound, that's the anatomy scan, I everything had been normal up to that point. I actually really was considering skipping it because everything was going so well, and I had a really important work meeting. I had some of the people that report to me that flew in to see me and be in a meeting, and actually I have so much appreciation for my work and my boss, because he actually was the one that convinced me not to skip it and to go. So I did. And when we got in for the anatomy scan, everything was looking really good. And then he kind of got toward the end and he asked me some questions, and I started to get nervous because I suddenly knew something was wrong. And he told me then that it appeared that my cervix was 100% effaced, meaning that it's fully open and there's no going back. At that time, I really didn't know what was happening. Everything started happening really fast. He took me into the doctor's office, and my OB told me that they would be admitting me to the hospital, which was right next door, immediately. So I went over to the hospital, literally immediately, and checked in, and kind of that's where we started, I guess, moving forward with what they call a cervical cerclage. Initially, they didn't know if they would be able to perform it just due to how progressed I already was. And actually, the crazy thing about all of this was that I had no symptoms that anything was happening. I knew nothing was wrong. I worked out that morning. Everything felt normal. And anyway, so they had initially told me that they didn't know if they were going to be able to salvage the situation. We had lost our first daughter at 26 weeks. Not very long before this. This was in March of 2022. We had our first daughter in June of 2021. So it was less than a year later. And as you can imagine, I'm just praying with everything I know to do. God, save this baby. I cannot go through this again. I don't think I'll survive it. And so the doctor, I had demanded this specific doctor who she was a high risk with my high risk doctor with my first pregnancy. And this pregnancy was not high risk up to this point. So I hadn't seen her yet, but I wanted her there. So I asked for her to be there. They told me her schedule was too busy. Miraculously, she made a way and she came and she comforted me through the whole situation. Basically, when they got in there, they realized that it was better than they thought, and they were able to basically like stitch up my cervix, and that's what bought me the 2 extra weeks that saved Maddie's life.
And you have such an important message that you want to make sure all moms understand. So you live up on the north side of Houston, not a good hour away from the Texas Medical Center during most traffic situations.
Yeah.
And even though it was that close, and they have a couple of level 3 NICUs and ICU, that's a neonatal ICU that can handle high risk pregnancies.
Yeah.
You had never been told that. So you didn't realize that maybe had a chance. Explain that and what you want people to understand about that.
Yeah. So when that was happening, I was at 20 weeks. As far as I know, babies cannot survive at 20 weeks. However, in my first pregnancy was the first time I learned that they could survive at 25. I didn't even know that, being a new mom and new to pregnancy. And so this time around, I was kind of thinking the same thing. Well, we got to get to 25. The doctors in that situation were telling me, you got to get to 24 weeks at least. That's the earliest we can save them. You have to get to 24 weeks. That was not the high risk doctor who was helping me at the time, Dr. Samuel. She's an angel. This is the other doctors there. So a couple of weeks later, when I started to go into labor, I was having contractions. I called, and the doctors didn't seem to want to fit me in at the moment. So I was kind of distressed, and I called Dr. Samuel's office and I said, please, can you get me in? I think I'm going into labor. And she fit me in, and she told me that day, she said, if you go into labor tonight, when you leave my office, full out labor, because she was trying to stop it. She gave me some medications to try to slow it. But she said, if you go into labor tonight, you need to go to the Women's Hospital of Texas. They are the best hospital there is. They save babies up to 21 weeks. And I went, what? I didn't even know this. And had I not talked to her that day, had I not called her, or, I would have just checked in the Woodlands. And sadly, now that I'm, aware of these things, and I'm kind of involved in like social media with following other women who've been through these situations and stuff, I've seen some stories about women who've had babies at 23 weeks, 22 weeks, and they let the babies die. And it's just horrific knowing that could have happened to us had I not made that one phone call.
And it takes that specialist who understands what to do with a baby that tiny. So let's talk about what happens then. So I'm going to bring up a picture here. So your precious baby is born, and how far along are you at this point?
So the day I had her, I was 23 weeks and 2 days. I went into labor at 22 weeks and 4 days, 22 weeks and 4 days, I think, or 5 days. I was in labor for 4 days. They were trying to actively stop the labor, and that's the reason for that. So when I finally did have to give birth, they were afraid there was an infection going on. The baby's heart rate kept dropping. And so the doctor, when we were admitted there, we were assigned to Dr. Kirschan, who is also an amazing doctor. We love him. He had to make some really hard decisions and serious decisions. And at 23 and 2 days, he decided it was time. And so we gave birth on April 1st, April Fool's Day, to Maddie. And she was 1 pound, just under 4 ounces, 1 pound, 3.75 ounces when she was born. And it was a wild situation. I'm in an emergency C-section. My first baby I had naturally. And so this was new. I was scared. It was just so much happening. And I remember just praying and praying and praying, because we had no idea. I mean, the conversations the doctors have with you leading up to giving birth to a 23-week baby are not good. They are scary. They are, everything from severe brain damage. They could be blind. They could be deaf. The chances of living are very small. Living with no long-term effects, lifelong problems, is almost unheard of. And so it was really scary going in. And they got her out, and they showed her to us for just a brief second, and then they rushed her off to the NICU. And my husband and I just, as they're kind of sewing me back up, we're just like praying and praying and praying. We really didn't talk a lot, just crying and praying, and silence. And then the neonatologist who was assigned at the time to her, came in, and she leaned over me and she said, Madeline is doing very well, and she's breathing on her own. And I mean, I just started bawling and praising God, like right there in front of everyone in the operating room. I didn't care, what anybody thought at the moment, because I knew that, it was such a big thing that she was breathing on her own. I mean, that's crazy.
It just takes my breath away to be able to hear you say that. But then you had another scare. So you feel like things are going better, and you ended up being in the hospital about 8 days before you were released, which shows that you were even going through a hard time yourself, while she would end up being there for months. But then you both get an infection. How scary did that take you to a new level of saying, oh my goodness, we have to fight something else now?
Yeah. So, I mean, anytime a baby is born that premature, you're going to have an uphill battle. And that's if everything goes well. If everything goes well, it's still difficult for them. So in this situation, we found out that she had an infection. At the in the at very beginning, they didn't quite know what infection it was or how she got it. After several days went by, they kind of and more testing, they figured out that she had E. coli. I actually had the same infection in my uterus, and so that kind of led. There's not a lot known whether or not that's what sent me into labor or if it's something that happened during labor because my sac broke, and sometimes things can just travel up into the if there's a leak in it. And so this was big. I think in the moment I was in so much shock. There was so much going on. We had, like I said, just lost our baby not too long before, and I was probably not, well, definitely not fully healed from that, and probably, you never really are, but trauma from the first birth, and then here we are again. And to be honest, when we were going through it, I don't remember ever thinking she's going to die, because I feel like God always gave me a sense of peace. And I very vividly remember, it was the day I got discharged. I was crying and crying and crying in the shower. I finally was able to shower after like 7 days of being in the hospital. I couldn't get up and shower very well with the C-section. And I was just like, God, I need a miracle. I need something, because I cannot lose this baby. And I'm getting out. I'm kind of coming back to the hospital room and starting to pack up my things so I can leave. And I just feel this peace come over me. And I felt like God told me. I mean, it wasn't like an audible voice, but it was just something like I just knew he was speaking to me. And he said, well, they don't know what's wrong. The doctors don't know what's wrong because it's not there. And to preface that a little bit, I have to say that, so she had all these things going on. She had E. coli, it crossed the blood-brain barrier, it became meningitis. This is extremely severe. I mean, this kills full-term babies, much less a 1-pound baby. She had some things going on with her bone marrow that were showing like really negative, almost like leukemia style, but the doctor was really confused. It didn't make sense. She had a grade 2 cerebral hemorrhage, or a brain bleed. She had cysts on her brain. She had respiratory distress syndrome from being born so early. She had a heart PDA, later things, other things. But in this moment, these were all very severe, life-threatening, things going on. And but the doctors kept telling me, we don't understand, because when I look at your daughter, she looks so good. She's fighting us. She's feisty. They told me she would like fight them whenever they would try to, change her diaper and switch out the tubes and stuff. And they said, a baby who's going through all of the things that your baby is, supposedly testing for, doesn't look like this, and I guess without really saying it, kind of probably insinuating that they're more like a little bit along the lifeless looking signs. And they said, your baby does not represent what we're testing for. And so with that being said, I felt like God really told me, like, the doctors don't know what's wrong because it's not there. And a few minutes later, I pick up my phone and I have a text thread with my family, who are all faith-filled women, powerful women of God. And my aunt says to me, they don't know what's wrong because it's not there. And I was like, it's confirmation, So I went home that night from the hospital, and that was the worst night of my life, going home without her, and just, being afraid. Everything that was happening at the time was so not looking good. So I came back to the hospital the next morning, and they were doing a repeat of her lumbar tap to test the spinal fluid again, because the doctor was confused why things didn't look like she was acting. And I prayed over her a lot that day. I mean, like some serious spiritual warfare. And the doctor, I passed her in the hall when I was leaving. It was, a few hours later, and she stopped me and she said, we got the tests back from her lumbar tap. And she says, we don't know what happened, but it's not there. We don't see any meningitis. We don't see anything in her spinal fluid or her spinal column. And and I mean, I almost fell to the floor, and she hugged me, and I just, started saying, well, it's because I've been praying, and God God healed her. And she said, well, it's working, so keep doing it.
To be able to hear a doctor who is at the top of their game say this had to feel so healing too, right?
Oh,
Like they had done all they could. They gave it everything that we have up to date to make a difference. And then you brought in the power of praying over your baby,
yeah.
and then things started to turn around. So you had that aha moment. You had those beautiful feelings that everything was going to be okay. And then
Hmm.
things started turning around quickly at that point,
Oh,
didn't it?
yeah. Hmm. After that happened, within a couple of weeks, I mean, everything just started turning around. I had been to a few prayer meetings after, and I had a couple people prophesy over her, and some of those things happened. I mean, just like within the next day, and she started her brain bleed dried up, the cysts on her brain disappeared, the respiratory distress syndrome. So she was under, they were telling me her lungs were a big issue because of the, obviously very, very premature. And she had respiratory distress syndrome. And believe she even had like a slightly collapsed lung on one side. There was something else going on. I remember they were concerned about it. And we had prayed about it in that group that night. And I went in the next day and they told me we're taking her off the ventilator today because she's doing really well. And I thought, that's just amazing, that it happened right after that. And so, I mean, at 25 weeks gestational, she was still only 1 pound, 6 ounces. She was breathing on her own with no ventilator, no. And I said, so in the beginning, I just want to clarify, I said she was breathing on her own when she first came out. She was, but they do still have to ventilate them to get their lungs back
Okay.
strong. So
That makes
she was ventilated in the very beginning, but then she came back off of it after 2 weeks, which is incredible
It is.
for a sniper
That
teacher.
fast is unbelievable, and we see the sign now. Congratulations, a graduate of NICU. That had to be the best feeling. So I want to show everybody how lovely this precious girl is. So she's a year old now, a little over a year. Look at those eyes. And I was so happy when I got to meet her, and she's just fuller than life. And she's doing really well, isn't she? She's
Oh yeah,
hitting the
yeah.
milestones.
Yes, no delays. She's smart. She's so smart, and she's obviously not 1 pound anymore. She's chunky, and yeah, that picture when we left the NICU, the doctor had asked us for a picture because he told us that they had never had a 23-weeker leave that early with no breathing tubes, no feeding tubes, no major medical intervention. That she was a record. So that's
And
why
you
we have that
showed
picture.
me her discharge papers, and they actually
Mhm.
say it was a miraculous recovery. How does it feel to have prayed for something so seriously and for that prayer to be answered? Because we know that not all prayers are answered because for whatever
Mhm.
reason it wasn't meant to be, but
Yeah.
you got your prayer.
Yeah. I mean, just I daily look at her and just cry and out of thankfulness. And there's a lot of the testimony behind the spiritual side of it that I don't have time to get into.
Yeah.
Um, I might share it on my social media so that people can know, because I think it's very important that what led us at least to understanding how to find healing. Because I can
Mhm.
tell you that I go to revivals where I see healing happen right in front of my eyes, and it is still very real today. Deliverance and healing is still very real, and people don't see it every day in the church.
Mhm.
And I think it's just people think it doesn't happen anymore because they don't see it. But I mean, attend a attend a deliverance revival and you'll see it. I promise.
Yeah. Well, and you're a testimony right here that with doctors saying that it was miraculous. So you have it backed as well. Well, I want to just quickly get into it. We're almost out of time, but just quickly get into how important you felt like it was to keep everything in her life so very pure, right down to everything that went into her body, which meant when she was only 2 pounds, she was due for a slew of vaccinations, but you wanted to hold off on that.
Yeah.
You wanted to make sure your husband was the blood donor so that
Mhm.
you knew exactly what was going on. Did that give you a sense of, I guess, I don't know, just peace knowing that you were doing everything as the mom that you could to make a difference in her life?
Yeah, definitely. The vaccine thing is so controversial, and to be honest, I'm not for a lot of them. Personally, we choose not to do any. But I know that not everybody feels that way, and that can sometimes be like a very controversial issue.
So everything you did worked because she's
Yeah.
thriving and she's doing so well. And I was so happy to meet her. And I'm just so happy for you and your family, and just so joyful that you were able to share this beautiful situation with us. And we want to update. So we better get to see her at 2 and see how she's doing. 2 as well, and see how she's doing. Well, my dog says hello and goodbye to you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Well, have a beautiful, blessed day, and thanks for being here with us.
Thank you too.
All right. And I just want to tell you all, if you have a story idea you want to share here on Lunch for the Soul, you can always reach out to me. You can find me on our Facebook page here on YouTube, or at melissa.wilson@fox.com. And you can always find our Lunch for the Soul segments here on our Fox 26 YouTube page. I hope you have a beautiful day, everybody. Join me next time, and we'll see you then. Have a good week.